Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Amazing Spider-Man. So, really for this movie, I would like people to know that this isn't my first shot of this film. I actually seen this movie in theaters because there was nothing else out. And so I think I had watched it maybe once after it had been in theaters just to kind of see something different or whichever. I think it was on TV one time late at night and I just had nothing better to do. And so I think this may be my third viewing of this movie. Maybe. I'm not quite sure. But I know I saw it in theaters at least, so give me that. So now going into this time around, really once we get past like the first hour of this movie, I'm just like, one, I don't like a high school Spider-Man, and we really have it toward this movie showcases why that we have so much high school Spider-Man in Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man, much more so than uh, than the Tobey Maguire stuff. Really, here we just have a almost shot for shot, severely similar approach to this movie than we do to the very first Spider-Man film, with us also having another green villain for this origin story, with us also having Norman Osborn somewhere in the background, Oscorp being involved in this story, really just having to go in and have us do so many, like, similar things, like a family dinner in a film that is to be just like a Thanksgiving moment from a prior film. And also having just two people kind of conflicting at a dinner table to where they have one person who is to eventually run off and stop eating a meal. Oh, this sounds familiar. Really, we also have it going on here that really this movie for me, I like the fact that it seemed that Peter Parker had to go out of his way to win over Mary Jane. Having her just kind of secretly just going on and like, I feel like in my bones that Peter Parker is Spider-Man and I have to just figure out this puzzle. Where in this movie we kind of have really just the whole Gwen not only like chasing after Peter instead of Peter chasing after her kind of thing, to where it's so easy for this girl to just fall into Peter's lap. It's ridiculous. And for also, like, we have, like, secrets that are either just kind of quickly given up here, or we have secrets that are to be this, big reveal. Like, oh, he found out. Oh, she found out. Oh, they found out. Ooh, wow. Saying that kind of hugely vaguely here because people may have not have seen this movie and now might be interested finally because there might be some other Amazing Spider-Man 2 film that people are like, should probably go into that because there's an Electro guy in there that may be very familiar at some other film. So there's a little bit more than that, but I'm trying to also let's be vague here. So, going on into this film, really, I just find this film, in all honesty, I just find it boring. I don't like it. Really, I want to see the good in this film, and there's certain bits and pieces of it that I can go on and just be like, you know what? If they probably had this one sliver of a scene and they had a video of just this one sliver of the scene, like the POV stuff I like the POV stuff. That thing is actually interesting. I like that different kind of approach. That part I like. But everything else to me is just to so badly be so familiar to something else that I feel like this is a carbon copy of some other film, that it doesn't feel like the writing in this movie is all that unique enough. Plus, also, we really just have a thing that is interesting trying to figure out the riddle of Peter Parker's actual mother and father, who is both Richard and Mary, who had bizarrely vanished. But we don't really, like, of course, as well as anything in this film, really solve much of anything here. Everything is to just be left for us to just have so much stuff to do in the sequel film, because this movie just made just enough money to garner one. So, going into this film, also, they have to try as desperately as much as possible to reinvent the whole, like, motto of with great power comes great responsibility. They kind of nix the whole power thing, and it's like, well, like, you just have responsibilities. Like, like, if you know that you can do some good, like, you should go and do that. And so we kind of have that whole approach for this film. So yeah, like, there's some slivers of stuff that I can say positive things about at some point, but, like, really that's just kind of really clutching at a possibly like 85% movie where not exactly jazzed about, not exactly uh, one that I want to consistently go out of my way, because I'm just so stuck just enjoying the Tobey Maguire films, even if there is a weirdly goofy dancing one where a lot of people are like, dude, the guy dances. Yeah, like, we can pretty much expect every Spider-Man at some point in some one of these movies to eventually dance or go and web a girl and spin her around and do goofy stuff. These films are built to do weird, goofy things. And so let's go out of our way to go on. And here's also one thing. Like, this movie also desperately tries to be, like, smarter than its original source material. And to me, I'm just like, I think that movie goes out of its way to, like, the previous stuff, to not waste time with all of these words that you're just like, who, what now? Like, we don't have to go and showcase an outlandish thing that is to make me have to say that there's a revolving mechanism that is to have a bunch of spiders with webs, and that's how eventually Peter ends up getting to be his spidered self. Why can't I just say, like, oh, Peter was going on into this one facility, and wouldn't you know it, a spider just crawled on him, just, and wouldn't you know it, he just stumbled in the wrong science lab. Man, that sucks, right? No, instead we have to go in like, well, we go into a room and there's computer chips and there's things to show us where eventually Peter is going to be getting his webbing from these cartridges. And then all of a sudden we go on to have this revolving mechanism that is to have all these spiders. And why should I have to go so further in depth about how something can just go down? We end up having to even say a goofy room thing that is to even tell us how Peter is to, of course, even get to his possible origin in this movie. So let's get into this. Let's go out of my way to say that it's about that time yet again, because I'm sure there's probably a number of complaints that I'll probably have during this film, but I'm going to try to be positive about this movie, even though there might be at some points where I just want to just say, like, what do we really just why do we really have just a lizard as a villain in this movie? Just a lizard? If anything, of course, like I think they're also just reusing an idea from what would have honestly been Spider-Man 4 to have Kirk Connors be a lizard, because really that's what their plan was. And so I guess since that was just scrapped, it's like, well, hey man, we're gonna still do this idea but not add any other villains afterwards, which freaking sucks. But hey, Norman Osborn is still hanging off to the side doing jack crap nothing, but I guess Norman Osborn is technically the second villain, which he does nothing, but technically second villain because you reference him. Name drop, whatever. So let's go into it. Let's go out of our way to say that it's about that time. Let's just go into that double five. Let's just go into spoilers about this one. Really, I know there's a lot of people that love this movie. There's a lot of people that want to go out of their way to tell me it's like, oh no, I disagree. I think Amazing Spider-Man is the best Spider-Man film. And you know what? Maybe that's because this was your first iteration of this character ever. Or maybe you just, you find the other Tobey Maguire films just long-winded, and this one is much more fast-paced, which I don't like the numerous cuts that this movie goes into, and you like the numerous cuts. You like the pacing of this film, and you like that this is seemingly a younger Peter and a younger number of people, with the exclusion of both Ben Parker and Aunt May, who were still kind of going, here's what would have made this better. Nix Ben Parker and Aunt May. What if we did the whole entire story with Peter Parker and Richard Parker and Mary Parker? Man, would that have drastically changed things? And I would have just been like, wow, like, this story would have probably been heads and toes a lot better. And maybe the whole story would have been built around that Mary has some secret and Peter is trying to get it out of her, to the point also where all of a sudden Doc Connors is trying to get it out of her. And then it eventually ends up spilling out towards the end of the movie. Like, there's a whole tug of war going on over really just Mary Parker. I don't know, like, they could have gone some other weird, wild direction here. I don't know, maybe Kirk Connors could have felt like a Dr. Octopus that is all of a sudden trying to, like, buy Mary's affection. But then all of a sudden when she dumps him, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to just turn into a lizard then. like, I'm gonna turn into a lizard because she dumped me. Like, we could have still had that one ugly duckling story. That could have come out something interesting. Give us something like that. That would have been cool. But it is what it is with this story. Anyways, I'm sure a lot of people are like, no, that story's dumb. Whatever, it would have been something vastly different than what we've been given from past Peter Parker universe. Plus, also, like, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man never even said what happened to his parents, so we never got that. That sucks. So this, so yeah, like, nobody ever explains what happens to their other parents besides Andrew Garfield. The one thing that is to be good about this is we finally get, like, some resolution of why we just have an Aunt May here, or a or whatever that kind of spawns out of this story. But anyways, let's go on. I've taken too much time. Let's just go into this. Spoilers now. Where can you go and see this movie? You could go out of your way to say that you can rent this film probably on an Amazon. I'm sure it's probably conveniently in a lot of different places. You can go and Google search these apps called either letter C movies, so a letter and a word of an app. You can dare in fact search C movies and download this app, and you'll be able to pretty much see anything that you want. You could also go on to Google search the word Fox HD movies, and you can go and find an app that the logo will say Fox HD movies, the title will say something different, play 1080p HD movies, whatever. Go and search these apps, download them, be able to watch this movie for free. I've also given people a ton of other different names of other different apps that you can dare, in fact, go and download this movie for absolutely free. Or you can download an app to watch this movie for free with ads. So check that out. So now, spoilers of this film, because I took freaking too long for the cryptic sense of all this. So let's go into it. So in the very beginning of this movie, we of course have young Peter Parker going on and trying his dad's glasses on, realizing that eventually Peter Parker is going to end up with glasses. So weirdly, again, another thing that they kind of stick the landing on another Spider-Man movie. A Peter Parker with glasses. Oh, what a changing of a story. So, we of course go on and we have young Peter who's kind of going on and being with his parents, and all of a sudden we have Richard who is going and deciding that he needs to go and find his secret file to have both his wife and him, both Richard and Mary, leave, because it's time for them to go off on some plane somewhere to eventually have this plane eventually crash, because sequel story. So we end up having Richard and Mary, before they go off on their plane, to obviously die here, because that's obvious, right? They aren't coming back anytime soon, and if they are, they're probably going to be on some hidden island somewhere, hiding away protective custody. So we have Richard and Mary dump their kid off because they're lazy parents. That sounded horrible. Let's be nice. Richard and Mary are to go and place their Peter Parker with, of course, a family member that could best suit him, which of course would be Ben Parker and Aunt May, which you can kind of cue up the fact that I don't remember exactly what May Parker, so what am I saying here? So we go on and we have this kid being plopped down in front of Ben and May, and so we now end up having this kid who grows several years older, who is now in this thing called a high school for anybody that speaks English. So we end up having Parker, who of course is to not be this really awkward, shy guy where all of a sudden women are just actually communicating and talking with him, and he's not going on and having to wave at a girl that isn't actually waving at him. There's a girl that's actually talking to him, and so Peter is talking to her back. So we end up having this rando girl who's asking Peter Parker if he can go and take photos of her boyfriend's car, because she wants to be able to frame this to give him as a gift. And Peter's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just look up that old schedule to see if I'm just really busy. I'll get right back with you. To just, like, hopefully my schedule is just, like, not filled to the brim. Because you, like, take your own god dang pictures. Like, if you were to ask me out, then I'd be like, ahoy? But no. So we, of course, end up having, kind of through Peter's school days, all of a sudden Flash, or Eugene, as a lot of people know him, Flash Thompson, is, of course, bullying another kid. Wow, like, Flash being a bully, like, That never gets old, right? Through every single Spider-Man movie you have ever seen, Flash being a bully to somebody. Either it's Parker or it's, in this movie, someone else for a mere second. But then we realize that Flash is like, oh, okay, back to Parker until Ben dies. Because, spoiler, Ben Parker dies again in this movie. It's not a big, massive surprise. It happens again. So, Peter is to go on and stop this Flash, this Eugene, from going on and bullying this kid. And so the way of which that Flash is to stop Eugene from going on and bullying this kid is simply by calling him by his actual name, which is Eugene. One thing that I would have actually liked since we actually have a Flash that fits like a comic book kind of version, it would have been cool if somehow we could have gotten the Venom symbiote and we could have gotten a Agent Venom Flash out of this. Possibly. That would have been a really interesting story. And maybe if there was to ever be a Amazing Spider-Man sequel someday, maybe we could tell that story, because I feel like we're probably not going to get Spider-Man Homecoming's Flash to eventually become that villain. It would be interesting, though. I would like that. But I just don't think that's going to be a possibility that's going to happen. I think Flash is just going to ever be remaining this bully of a character, and I just don't think that he'll ever be this villain of a character in some point of that franchise. But moving on. So, Flash ends up beating up Peter, and so he ends up going to class, and so Gwen, of course, is asking his name, and Peter's like, well, like, you don't know my name? And she's like, no, like, I know what your name is, I'm just wondering if you know what your name is. So, we, of course, after school is out, we, of course, have reasonably Peter who goes home and is to, of course, go on and find out that I guess the something is leaking in the basement of Ben and Aunt May's house. So Peter is to go and kind of troubleshoot with Ben to figure out what the problem is. And they're mentoring all these goofy gobbly parts because Peter has to be smart in this film and he has to figure out how to fix some kind of problem. Because we end up having him write equations and say parts names, just making him seem so much more intelligent than the previous Tobey Maguire. We've had Tobey Maguire go on as Peter Parker and say a lot of intelligent stuff too. Electron volts and so on and so forth. We've had him go and answer equations. We've had him go and talk to Dr. Octavius and be as his equal, and so on and so forth. This doesn't seem new for a Peter Parker character, but I guess it might seem new to people, I guess. Anyways, that sounded condescending, but maybe it was meant that way. So, while Peter is to start to rummage through all of this stuff because Ben is to go on and say that go and pick through anything that you think that there's less saving down here. And so all of a sudden we have, of course, out of all the things that, of course, Peter is to grab, it's the one thing that has a story attached to it. Wow, what a coinkydink. So, Peter ends up grabbing this one briefcase that, of course, would have RP on it, which, of course, means Richard Parker. So, all of a sudden, we have this magnificent story that both Aunt May and Ben Parker to have here. That is to showcase, like, well, hey, this one item was the one thing that Richard was going on and buying because it seemed very peculiar at the time for a 19-year-old to have some kind of weird briefcase like that. But coincidentally, this thing was to go on and have your father meet your mother. Wow, because she was the one that gave him this briefcase, and that's how they met. Honestly, like, I would like this story to be obviously that Richard was just like, well, I want to go here because I want to get this woman. And the briefcasing thing is just for us to just start talking. It was an icebreaker moment. And more than likely, Richard was just like, I am never going to have this briefcase for the rest of my life. I am just going to just shove it in some closet somewhere. But, like, hey, I got the woman that I wanted because we just started to conversate, so to speak, between the purchase of this thing. Conversate? That's probably not a word. Oh, well, it is now in this video. So, we, of course, end up having Peter whipping out a picture of both Richard and Dr. Connors. And so, at first, Ben is going and like, don't know who that guy is, even though he knows exactly who he is, because maybe he Googled him later on and was like, oh yeah, that guy. Maybe I should go and tell Peter that, because now I weirdly know. So, we eventually have it where, of course, Ben is to go on and talk to Peter, and all of a sudden Peter's wearing, of course, what is to look like his father's glasses, because Peter, of course, had to take out his contact lenses. And so we now have to just say, it's like, well, did Peter, when he became Spider-Man, did he still need those contact lenses? Or... or what? Did he never need them after that point? That would be nice to have specified that, because now that he has contact lenses on, now we can just be like, oh, well, like, he still needed the contact lenses, I guess, even though, like, we had Dr. Connors who said when he goes through his lizard changes, he doesn't need his glasses, but still, it is what it is. So, we go on and we have Ben going on and fiddling with a Rubik's Cube that seems perfectly not adjusted, moved whatsoever. And I guess there was a cut somewhere where Ben was to fiddle with this Rubik's Cube, and then eventually they went on to do another scene, and then the Rubik's Cube seems adjusted, I guess? Who cares? So, it's just an observation that I saw. So, anyways, Ben Parker is to go on and tell, of course, Peter who that guy is, and of course it's Dr. Connors. Of course, a guy that we've seen through a number of Spider-Man stories and whichever, later going on to eventually have Dr. Connors working for S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Ultimate Spider-Man series, which I honestly thought was really cool. And then I think we also had the same guy who did the voice, possibly for the movie, the original movie, gone on and did Ultimate Spider-Man, I think. Don't quote me on that, because I think I might be wrong, but because it's been a while since I've seen Ultimate Spider-Man, but still, it's kind of cool to see Dr. Connors used there. So, we of course now have Peter Googling who the heck Dr. Connors is, and so he ends up going on and finding that Dr. Connors, of course, is working with Oscorp, and that they're going on and doing some reptile gene slicing thing, because of course, because we're going to have Dr. Connors try and, of course, in some scientific way, grow back his arm. Because, of course, that's always the story with Dr. Connors, because that's always a very interesting approach to go about doing that story. So, what I think, but I like Dr. Connors. I always enjoyed that character. So good. I really enjoyed it. So, we go on now when we actually have it where Peter Parker is to go on and make it to the Oscorp building, And it seems that bizarrely during the time that Peter Parker is going on to make it to uh, this Oscorp at this specific time, I guess there is to be consistent tours going on that is to all of a sudden have a bunch of intern badges that I guess any rando could go and grab an intern badge and just go on and place a tour with eventually having Gwen Stacy being the tour guide and being the head intern of all this because I guess she is top of her class, which Peter Parker is to eventually argue with her that she may not be the top of her class at some point. So we end up having Dr. Connors, who is to go on and kind of do a little bit of Q&A about what they are actually going on and doing here. And we immediately have Peter answer exactly what's going on because Peter is to read every single stitch of everything that is to go on with Dr. Connors, reading his book, going on and reading all the articles that has anything to do with him because he wants to feel like he knows everything about this guy before he approaches him, because that's what his mission really is here to do, to meet with Dr. Connors. So we, of course, end up having it to where it seems that Dr. Connors is really impressed with with Peter Parker's answer about him being able to say exactly what they're doing here about slicing DNA with animals and humans and so on and so forth, kind of testing if this could possibly work for the better. So we go on here and we have, of course, Gwen pulling Peter aside, just saying like, "Hey, did you follow me here because you're just really into me? And like I'm just gonna think I'm all that in a bag of chips, and you aren't gonna be like just like obviously just playing off the fact that like you're a stalker." Yes, maybe there was a duo agenda here. Maybe he was like, but then he was also just like, but that Connors though, but that Connors though. So Peter ends up going on and, of course, stumbling into a guy called Rotha, which we find this guy is to luckily have the same labeled paperwork as, of course, the labeled paperwork that is to go with Richard Parker's research. And so now Peter is to go on and follow Rotha into a secret door that is to not just have some weird thumbprint or secret code of some sort that is to be only knowing to one person and one person alone, because Peter is to immediately just intelligently be able to unlock this door by just tossing a couple of things just side to side and whoop-de-doo. So we of course have this room being called the Biocable Development Unit place. So everything that I had said, of course, in the cryptic sense is stuff that happens in here, where we of course end up seeing Peter going and looking at what is to be eventually the spider cartridges, and he is to go on to this revolving mechanism like thing to see all these spiders who are going on and working on this webbing. And eventually Peter is to kind of push and fling this one part of this one web, all of a sudden making this kind of mechanism maybe falter at some point. All of a sudden having these spiders just drop all upon Peter, and he's trying to kick them all off. Eventually for us, when Peter is to leave this room, all of a sudden we find out that Peter is to have one spider that crawls behind him and bites him in the back of his neck, while of course Gwen is going on and taking his intern badge because she just does not trust him and wants to know what his real motives are here besides getting in Gwen's pants, because he will not be able to, because this is the movie's rating of which that it is. So so we go on here and we of course have it where we have a skateboard that just appears out of nowhere also in this scene. And because we have Peter, who obviously didn't have a skateboard, but now just conveniently just has one because he always has a skateboard in this film. Even if it doesn't make sense at some points in time, but it is what it is. So Peter goes on after that whole spider bite situation, and of course is to go on and be in the subway, where I guess he falls asleep seemingly. He falls asleep because of the spider bite, and all of a sudden, we end up having a guy who puts a bottle over this guy's head, and all of a sudden Peter is to wake up because there is a dot of sweat from this bottle that is to go onto his nose and wake him up, because it seems that Peter is to sense everything. So all of a sudden Peter is to knock this beer over onto this woman, and so Peter is to try to console this woman by tapping her shoulder, but then all of a sudden has his hand sticking onto this woman's shirt, ripping it off to the point of all of a sudden we end up seeing this girl's bra. Man, Peter, why couldn't you have gotten a little bit more lucky with this whole ripping of clothes off thing? But of course, we couldn't because this isn't a rated R movie, so why would we? So, that all of a sudden leads a guy just viciously upset because Peter had ripped the clothes off of some woman. You would have thought he would have been extremely happy at this moment, but instead, he is just oddly upset, which leads to a fight in a subway, which, I'll give it that, this thing here. I can like how Andrew Garfield, through this movie, is to fight. It seems that his fighting seems much more parkourish than Tobey Maguire's fighting. But really still, like, it seems that a lot of times we end up having Tobey using a lot more, like, webbing-like things to defeat a person than possibly going and using some kind of roundhouse move or MMA fighting skill, whichever. It seems that a lot of times we just have it where Tobey probably did rely a lot on webbing at some point in time here. From what I can remember about the other Spider-Man movies, because it also has been a while since I've seen those. But anyways, pushing on. So, we of course have Andrew actually going and beating up these guys, where it seems to be like, okay, we don't even get to the real legitimate, with great power comes great responsibility, so you better start beating up people moment. We just have, weirdly, the whole spider sense kicking in right now, or the Peter tingle, to go on to have Peter just beating up people without effort, which I honestly don't like. I don't like it. Like, I don't like how he can just, like, he can just beat up people without trying. Like, there's no training, there's no effort, there's no whatever. It just kicks in and he just parkours people to death because this guy is to just do the whole Spider-Man thing effortlessly, as well as winning over women effortlessly, as well as just having a life that he's not exactly thrilled about effortlessly. So moving on. So we end up having, of course, Peter making it home, and we of course have his aunt and his uncle consistently worried about him to the point that they're of course waiting up for him. So we go on and we have Peter making his way home to catch a fly, not with chopsticks like of course Ralph Macchio had did in A Karate Kid. No, we just have Peter Pepper picked a pepper. We have Parker here who goes on and catches a fly with his fingers. He's like, He should have ate the fly. He should have, but he didn't. So we have Peter catch a fly with his finger and then lets it go. What's the whole point of that? Catch it and then, sadly, unless you're one of those people, you could have chucked the fly out the window. That would have been a nice gesture, but no, you didn't either. So now Peter and frickin' Aunt May are just like, hey man, like, what are you doing? We were trying to get to that fly for hours, and you just catch it and do nothing with it? You son of a bitch! So, Peter, of course, goes on, and is to have kind of Aunt May and Ben get an argument here, because Peter is to go on and eat Aunt May's meatloaf, and Peter is saying, because he's, like, obviously just high, and he's just like, this meatloaf is the best meatloaf. And Ben's like, nobody likes your meatloaf. And then all of a sudden, like, Hame's like, like, dude, I've been making so many meatloafs, and you hated him all this time? Yeah, there's some times where there's some food that just, it's not good. Like, there's some food that obviously should never actually be made, but it gets made anyways, and it's just like, food. Anyways, so we have, of course, Peter who's going through and getting a number of things out of this fridge, and we don't have that, of course, Tobey Maguire cafe or lunchroom scene where he's going through and grabbing all these items all on one tray. No, we don't see that. We don't see the difficulty of probably a scene that probably took numerous hours to accomplish. We just have Andrew just stacking a bunch of stuff on him, and he's like, oh, I got it. And they're like, does he have your mac and cheese? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. So, Peter Parker goes on and does the very traditional, I need to figure out my power scene by doing it by accident because I will break some and make a lot of mistakes. Like, I don't know, like any origin movie that we've possibly ever seen. Go ahead and look at Power Rangers, the 2017 movie, where we have, of course, people breaking sinks. Let's go and let's watch Wolverine, the origin story, where Wolverine claws through the sink and busts pipes and whatever. It's the clicheist, most of clicheist, oh, guys, hey, guys, I woke up and I have powers now. Hopefully that doesn't conflict with my morning routine, 'cause it will. So, we have, of course, Andrew that splatters his toothpaste and is to now have to use the toothpaste, and he's like, gross. Anyways, that's gross to me. So, we, of course, have Peter that's trying to find the sensitivity of him being able to do any number of things. And all of a sudden, at one point, he has the keys all on his fingers because evidently they just pop right off his keyboard. Man, this keyboard. All right. So we go on and we eventually have it to where Peter is to make his way to find where Kirk Connors is to live and just be like, hey, like, I'm Peter Parker's son, or I'm Richard Parker's son, and I'm here. Because we immediately have Connors is like, well, hey, like, this is my home, like I got stuff to do, but wait, now that you told me that you're Richard Parker's son, I'm going to drop everything that I'm doing to just talk to you about science. And just kind of give you a closure moment to just kind of, like, have you also just say, yeah, I don't know about your parents either. Sucks to be you. Because we have Peter going on and talking to Connors here, and Connors like, yeah, like, I don't know what happened to your parents either. If anything, like, it seemed like your father and I were so close to the work that we were doing, but then all of a sudden one day he just mysteriously vanished, and we, like, after he vanished, I had just gotten very angry and decided to not only, like, just not get involved with your family at all after this, but I had gotten just so upset. Like, yeah, so upset that you just drastically changed, like, what you were doing with your job to just fit the fact that you he's doing the exact same thing he was still doing before this whole thing happened, but now there's just a lesser thing of that whole spider project. So, wait a minute. So, why is it that they still have that spider project thing going on if Richard is not there to add anything to it? Why is that still there? What are they what did they gain to accomplish out of just having that science project still there, thinking that Richard would show back up at one point? How does what Connors is working on have anything to do with those spiders? Nothing? Great. I honestly just had that question. And that's the question of which that I have. So we go on and we, of course, have Connors at one point drop this cup and Peter catches it and he's like, oh, great reflexes. Did you also get hit by a bike messenger at one point? Did it knock you down? I think I figured out something. I have to go. No one says no to me. But after that conversation, we end up, or after that kind of bulk of conversation of a closure moment, we have Peter, who is, of course, to give Connors an equation kind of solving certain things. And Connors is just like, well, me, like, let's go and let's work in a lab together. Let's see if you are just like your dad, or maybe you just stole a lot of from your dad and are just giving me this thing as just this, like, hey, here you go. So we, of course, end up having Peter, who is going on and doing something after school, which ends up having him in this gym where I guess Flash and a bunch of other basketball guys are having practice, I guess. So we go on and we consistently have this basketball that keeps getting almost tossed into these girls' way where they're going and trying to put up this or do this banner, and things get knocked over. You would think that these girls would have found some art class somewhere instead of this gym to do this thing, realizing that these people are in this gym. Thought process. But we, of course, have Peter that is to show Flash that he now has superpowers and is going on and giving us this moment again where Ben Parker is to reiterate to Peter here. It's like, well, just because you have powers doesn't mean that you should, like, show off and be a showboat. Kind of like the other Tobey Maguire, the Spider-Man movie, where it's like, we have Peter that ends up getting powers and then is to beat down Flash in some way or whatever by humiliating him in this movie, where in the other one he actually fights him. So we then turn around and have Peter going and doing a pretty good Michael Jordan interpretation here of him going and slam dunking and breaking this of course, basketball hoop, backboard, whatever. So we now have it where I guess Peter is some awful trouble because of breaking this backboard. And so Ben is to go on and say, it's like, well, hey, like I guess this all comes down to community service. What? Like, don't mistakes happen? Like you. Plus, in high school, you're already technically doing a bunch of community service anyways. So, like, this guy has to do even more community service, which we never actually see in this film whatsoever at all. What is the point of him doing community services, or if there isn't actually any community service that Peter actually does in this film? That's my question. Is him being Spider-Man a community service? So maybe he is to go on and just say, hey, is Nick Fury in this world so I can write off some community service? is Tony Stark in this movie so I can write off some community service, you know what I'm saying? Anyways, so we of course have Ben who comes in and is lecturing Peter and kind of doing a dad moment, but all of a sudden Gwen ends up appearing, and so Ben is telling like, "Oh, isn't that the girl that's on your computer that you're just like pining away for?" And weirdly, she can just drop in your lap at any moment because she's right here. And then so Ben, of course, is to mention that he's Peter's parole officer and leaves. So all of a sudden we have this awkward, weird moment where uh, Ben Peter is telling Gwen here. That's where I got the names confused. Peter is telling Gwen that Ben is a pathological liar, and so Gwen is just like, well, like, hey, what are you doing with my picture? And he's like, oh, I'm just doing some touching up. And she's like, oh, you're doing some touching? Oh, so much innuendos going on here. So we really have it to where we have some mumbling, jumbling, scrumbling going on here between both Peter and Gwen going on and like, well, hey, like maybe we can go out and do something. Like maybe not right now because we're both really busy for some odd reason, but hey, maybe we'll go and have some branzini or branzino or whatever the freaking weird goofy meal that you guys are to have that doesn't actually make sense of what it actually is because is branzino just fish? What is that? What is that meal? It's like eventually shawarma because I at one point had shawarma and I'm like, this meal is freaking gross. Uh, why do they end up having to say these bizarre foods that no one would ever want to eat because it doesn't taste good ever in these films? Why don't you actually have a cheeseburger or some kind of good meal? Healthy, probably also, right? Because these guys have to be like impossible burgers, and I'm sure, right? Because they really just have to just like, how slim can I be for these movies? Because I'm wearing spandex. So we of course go on and have Peter showcasing more of his powers because he has to do a thing and stuff. So he has to go to his own practice hideaway, whatever. That eventually is to be painted with his logo somewhere on this wall for him to go through these chains and swing around like he's Tarzan, technically, for whatever reason, because he doesn't have quite the web shooters yet. And so we end up having, of course, Kurt Connors at some point in this film, which I probably forgot about because I quickly glazed through it, going and talking to Rotha. And so we have a kind of timetable going on for Connors to come up with this cure for Norman Osborn because Norman Osborn is technically dying here. Of what? Not exactly sure. He's dying of just not being in this movie because sequel. And because we'll see him in the sequel. It won't be the same, like, no one says no to me, but, like, we'll still get that guy. It'll be somebody different, older, wiser actor. Anyways, so we now kind of have Connors kind of pinched here to desperately try to figure out this lizard puzzle of a thing to grow this other limb going on here. Not really for the benefit of Oscorp, it's just his own personal benefit with his phantom limb syndrome that he desperately just wants to be cured. So, we of course have both Peter and Connors trying to figure out this whole rat problem, and they're going on and trying to run through scenarios to see if a mouse will grow back its limb, and eventually it will. And I'm like, man, I just seen I Am Legend, and this feels just very familiar to what's going on here. Plus, also with a rat just turning into some kind of lizard. Ghostbusters 2 there for you. So, World of the Psychics. So, early stage of movie. So, we go on and we have Peter, who had come up with the cure for Connors, we end up having, of course, after Ben was to leave, uh, Peter and Gwen to just kind of have their mumbling date rain check thing. Ben was to go on and tell Peter, hey, like, uh, because I had to come in here uh, to do this thing with you, you need to go and pick up your aunt. I don't know how exactly he's gonna pick her up. Is he gonna get an Uber? Is he like? Are they gonna like? Is she just gonna like follow him through the subways? I'm kind of baffled and confused here. So we go on and we eventually have it where Peter is getting a phone call from Ben and he ignores it to finish up this science. This science. Vicious science. So when, of course, Peter is to make his way home, all of a sudden we have both Aunt May and Ben who are waiting up for Peter yet again because Ben is now furious. Furious? Maybe he is a little furry. He's furious with Peter that, of course, Aunt May is to have not have had Peter to pick her up? Question mark? I don't know what this means. How is he to get her? I'm confused. Following her? Take her home? What does this mean? I'm so baffled and confused by this. So, because Peter Parker does not have a car in this film, from what I've seen. Am I wrong? Does he have the tokens for the subway? What? I want to figure this out. So, because I couldn't figure it out in the movie, so I'm having to forcibly again figure it out here. So, we now end up going on and still having it where Ben Parker is still comparing Peter to his father, saying like, I know that you're just like your dad, and like I know that you're like really just, I'm gonna have to just make it similar that you were just like your dad, so that way you can toss it to me that I'm not your real father, because I want that moment so desperately, but you're not going to give it to me, Peter. You're not going to give it to me. So Ben is to go on and say, it's like, well, hey, like, but if you know that you need to go and do something good, you should do it. That you have responsibilities, and that your father like knew that. And then Peter is like, oh well, like responsibilities, right? Then why isn't he here telling me this? Like, why isn't he here being my parent instead of you? And then Ben, after Peter is to leave and break the door, Ben is to go after him, trying to find him. And I think Peter goes left and Ben goes right, weirdly. Because I was like, Ben is shouting out for Peter, and he went, I think, the other way. I don't know. What am I thinking here? So, we now, of course, go on and have Peter that is to go to this convenience store and get a thing of milk. And, excuse me, and he weirdly doesn't have 2 cents. So, all of a sudden, we have it where Peter is trying to steal from this 2 cent like side thing, and we have, of course, the store clerk was saying, it's like, well, hey guy, like, it's policy that that you can only take this certain number of things if you like pay $10 worth of items. That doesn't even make sense for a policy. I'm like, you get a consolation prize for paying over a certain amount. That doesn't make any sense. I know there's some gas stations where you have to pay like something over $10. You can't just like, you have to like make a pretty decent amount of purchase when you go to a gas station, which I'm like, it seems like a ripoff. Like, nah, like, but I guess when really looking at it, like, you're gonna go on and get like a bunch of stuff at a gas station than you probably wouldn't have at a gas station, but still, because it's convenient, because it's like a lot of times walking distances or a lot of gas stations. But anyways, so I would do that a lot of times. I would just go to the gas station, like, hey man, like I'm gonna be watching some movies, so might as well just take a bunch of candy here, whatever. Uh, get a slushie, because man, do I just love eventually getting a slushie and just like ices or whatever they usually call them. And they weirdly have those at a gas stations, and they're actually pretty good. So now everybody wants slushies. That's not my fault. It's on you. So we go on here and we have this whole kerfuffle about 2 cents and policies and whatever. And so Peter just walks off here, and we end up having uh, a thief of sorts that is to go on here and drop this thing for this guy to go on and have to go and retrieve it. And so this guy steals everything from the register, goes and chucks this guy a thing of milk, Peter, of course, and then goes on and runs off with his beer. So we have the store clerk who runs off to go and try to get this guy who had obviously robbed him, and have the store clerk who's asking Peter for help, and Peter's just like, well, hey, it's not my policy. So, in other words, I missed the part where that's my problem. Same thing. So, same identical thing. So, we now go on and have this thief of sorts, because I don't think he actually has a name in this movie, that has a star tattooed on his arm, which we have to reiterate numerous times in this film, because people won't remember this guy has a star on his arm for whatever freaking reason. So, and I don't think they ever really catch this guy. There is never a catching of Guy. In the other Tobey Maguire films, eventually they catch the guy, but it's not even the right guy. It's some other dude, which they don't even catch either. So, this, like, man, we just never, like, catch this guy. Like, man, like, in the Batman world of things, Joe Chill gets quickly caught. Besides maybe Gotham, we never really figure out who the guy who was the killer in Gotham, but still, because I guess that really doesn't matter. But, like, freaking this thing, like, man. So, the guy who is a thief is to eventually go on and have this gun, which eventually he drops, and then both Ben and this guy are kind of rustling for this gun. Ben gets shot. So, now, of course, while this thief is running away, all of a sudden Peter is to go back after hearing these gunshots and realizing that his uncle had got shot. Now, of course, we end up having it to where we have Peter back at his house, and the police are going and filling out this report, and there, of course, is to be this police officer asking May if he's ever seen this guy before, and she's like, well, of course not. So they're like, well, yeah. So we go on, and we, of course, have Peter look at the mugshot, realizing that the guy that he had stopped, or had not stopped from stealing this register, was to go on and kill his uncle. So, making it so that Peter, again, is to be at fault for his uncle's death for another movie generation of things. So, we, of course, go on and have, of course, Uncle Ben's funeral and so on and so forth. Peter is to go on to go back to school, where all of a sudden everybody bizarrely is to know that Peter's uncle is dead. You know what? That would never happen in any school. How is it that these people know so quickly? Because normally, like, nobody would know. Like, I would go into school, like, hey, like, why were you gone yesterday, if somebody even really cared? And then I'm like, oh, yeah, I was sick. And they're like, oh, okay, all right. Like, kind of figure that. Like, no one would know why you were gone. Like, it's not like somebody got this instant message. They're like, oh, yeah, This guy, yeah, sick. Oh, yeah, we were concerned. Yeah, we were real. No one gives a but all of a sudden the school does for some odd reason. They secretly know that Ben is dead. Weirdly, oddly. So Peter is to go to school and he's just like trying to go through his normal day, but Flash is going on and saying like, "Hey man, like about your uncle." And so like Peter is like, "You know what? Not today." He grabs Flash and chucks him against his locker. He's like, "Good, good." I feel the hate flowing through you. No, that was a joke. That was a joke. So, it feels good, doesn't it? Is really what he says here. So, Peter goes on and is to bump into Gwen, who obviously knows also because she just feels it in the Force. Maybe these people have Force power. That's all they know. They could sense there's something wrong with Peter, and they just know. Maybe they saw Rain of Fire recently and they quoted Star Wars. I don't know. So Gwen is to go on and hug Peter, and Peter is to go on and walk off, trying to just have this just be like another normal day. So we, of course, go on and have Peter, who's like, well, hey, man, with great power, there's great responsibility for me to realize that this quote isn't actually put into this movie for whatever odd reason. So Peter goes on and is to eventually go and try and find his father's killer and find some random guy who looks similar to him because long hair. So Peter goes and tries to beat this guy down, and then all of a sudden a number of his gang all starts to come in here, and so Peter, who is now outnumbered, has to start parkouring people to death and try and eventually parkour his way from getting away from these villains. And eventually Peter is to re-meet back up with this guy, where he goes on to check if this guy has the tattoo, and he doesn't, so he just kind of lets him just kind of hang off to the side of this building, but then is to go on and get out of here and walk off, to all of a sudden fall off of this roof into this one wrestling arena where all these luchador masks are to be present. And we have the guy screaming like, "Hey, I know what you look like. I know you. I know you now. I know you're Peter Parker." So all of a sudden Peter Parker is looking at these masks and he's like, maybe I should hide my identity. For whatever reason, I should become a symbol that people should just like symbolize with. Whatever. Anyways, pushing on. So we go on and we have Peter, who obviously is a big fan of eBay because so he doesn't have a community service thing going on in this film, but on top of it, he also doesn't have a job. So what does he do for this thing called money, for suits and stuff, for things? Is he just kind of like, is there some kind of inheritance that Richard and Mary are to leave Peter? I'd like to hope so, because that's the only thing that makes sense out of this. So Peter is to go on and, of course, make a mask that he just wears sunglasses and a ski mask with. So he doesn't have the full-on suit just yet because we still have that POV coming. So Peter is to go and fight crime with him not being able to have people see what he looks like now. So Peter goes and consistently have this montaging thing where he goes on and is to find these guys who are still not the guy. Peter goes on and is to come up with these cartridges that are to be his web shooters. And so weirdly we have Peter going and web shooting some kind of Christmas wreath that I guess is to just really say here that maybe if there was to be anything to be destroyed, I guess it was a Christmas wreath from this webbing, because we've had at some points before where Peter has gone on and broken a rocket or crushed a Dr. Pepsi can at some point. And also, he had destroyed a lamp that all of a sudden, weirdly, after a certain number of minutes, reappears in some scene in some Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. So pushing on. So now, of course, we get this big, massive POV scene of Peter now just like webbing his way and then POVing to showcase us this new suit in a not so like clear way, but anyways, we still see him. And really, like, I can say that I don't overall like the Tobey Maguire suit does have a much more detailed look to it, but I can like how this suit does have this like sneaker slash like basketball look to it, and so I can just be okay with that. We also have it to where Peter is to, of course, like print out his suit, which, in all honesty, like there's red print that is supposed to go over the Spider-Man. Is it black? What is the? There's so many questions that I have about this film that I shouldn't be wasting the time questioning, but it is what it is with this movie. So we go on, and of course, after Peter's POV scene, the big suit reveal, we of course all of a sudden have Aunt May calling Peter, like, hey, can you give me some organic eggs? Because really, like, organic is just the thing now. It's jamming. And Peter's like, yeah, it is jamming. Paraphrasing heavily here. So, pushing on. So, we go on, and instead of having Peter just go and find Aunt May's eggs right away, he desperately wants to go instead and find another one of a guy who is to look like a thug that is to resemble the guy that might have shot Ben Parker. So we go on and have this guy who's a car thief, and Peter is to go on and say, like, well, hey, like he's to make all these crack wise and jokes and whatever. This guy is to try to get out of the car, and Peter is to consistently web the car closed consistently. Or web the car door closed consistently here. To where the guy goes out through the window, and Peter's like, oh, that's smart. Good idea. So all of a sudden, this thug is to whip out this knife, and Peter is like, oh my god, knives, my one weakness. Which there's something about me that does laugh here, but then there's also some points in me where honestly the jokes that Andrew Garfield or Peter Parker does have here just are cringe or annoying or just through them. But we of course have Andrew that just webs the crap out of this guy, because if we just have him do his parkour, we now have to web the crap out of people now, because that's a thing. So we go on and we have Peter who pokes a hole for this guy because he's very considerate about a criminal's breathing. And so we go on and have again where Peter is to realize that this guy is not the guy. So that sucks. So we of course push on here and have Peter make his way back home, because we also have a moment where it seems like the police are kind of pushing forward to arrest Spider-Man here. And we of course had Peter who's like, well, boys in blue here, yeah. And then he's like, hey, I just did 80% of your job for you. Yeah, but you stuck him onto a wall with webbing. So how easy is their job really going to be after that? Just thinking. So we of course have Andrew that goes home after this whole ordeal and is to of course be beaten up, brutally, battered, smacked around. Because that's what he looks like. And so he ends up of course forgetting about the organic eggs. So we just have Aunt May who's just kind of furious and just kind of waiting up for Peter. Peter's like, don't wait up for me. And she's like, I have to. As well as to consistently see you come home and see you get battered and bruised. And like, Aunt May is like, who does this to you? Who does this? Straight up. Anyways, so we go on and eventually have it where Peter is to, of course, make his way to Gwen's place after Gwen is to go on and give her address to Peter to uh, eat some branzini. Some, what is it called? Branzino? Sure. Fish thing. Whatever that is. So, I'm sorry if I offend anybody who has ever had this meal, if it's a legitimate meal or not. I'm not sure. Never had it before. So, we go on and we have Peter who uses the fire escape to make his way to Gwen. What if he would have went up the fire escape and he wouldn't have went into Gwen's room? That would have been a really awkward situation. That would have been something that would have probably came out of the superhero movie, where all of a sudden, like, we have that variation of Peter Parker is looking out a window at some kind of overweight set man that is to be going and just rubbing his chest awkwardly, and where that version of that Peter Parker is like, ugh. And then he, like, I don't know exactly what his name is. Maybe it was Roy. Yeah, maybe it was Roy. I don't remember. It's been such a long time since I've seen that movie. But I reviewed it. Check it out. So, Peter is to make his way into Gwen's room. And so all of a sudden, Captain Stacy, because all it says is Captain Stacy on the IMDb. Sorry if this guy legitimately has a name, and I'm not saying what it is. I'm just saying Captain Stacy here because that's all that really says in IMDb. So Dennis Leary comes in because I'm a big fan of Dennis Leary's stand-up. I'll admittedly always say that I always love this guy's stand-up. And I like the fact that I think Dennis Leary had figured out a way to write himself into the sequel because he wanted to be in the sequel movie. And so you gotta give it to that. Dennis Leary had come up with an idea of how they could write him into the sequel, and they went with it. They went with it. What a brilliant guy that they took his idea and basically stole it and ran with it. So, unless they were already writing that for him to just do that and he just spoiled that for everybody. Dang you, Dennis Leary, because it doesn't matter. Anyways, so Captain Stacy is to kind of barge in and be like, who's this man? Let me go and bust out my gun and pow! And this movie would be a lot over a lot quicker. So, all of a sudden we have, of course, Gwen who's mentioning about Peter's suit. And he's like, suit? You know I'm Spider-Man? And Gwen's like, no, this suit because you should be wearing a really nice suit to come to dinner and whatever. But I guess it's too late now. So Captain Stacy is, of course, saying like, hey, do you love Branzini? Branzino? Like, a thing you can't even freaking pronounce because heaven forbid, right? So really, I guess there is some bizarrish Branzino reference in the Tom Holland Tom Holland Spider-Man movie. I don't know why, but I guess it's there. It exists. Sure. So I say Flash because Flash Thompson had said that line, hence where I got confused. So we go on here and we of course have eventually Peter going to dinner, not really realizing what the heck to do with this food. He just sees a fish in front of him. It's like, So we have one of the Stacy kids who is to go and start like helping Peter figure out about this food because really it's all about the kids. It's all about the kids in this movie. So, but when we have some Mother Hubbards going on, a lot of kids are like, say what now? Once we get some cuss words flying, they're like, huh? So, really after this dinner between both Captain Stacy and Peter Parker, bickering back and forth on how Peter Parker had seen some Spider-Man video, and this is like J. Jonah Jameson and like Peter Parker just bickering for movies before, but this time it's just a tweet bit different. So we had them kind of bickering back and forth of whether like Spider-Man is doing the right thing, and we have Peter who had bizarrely saw some YouTube video convincing himself that Spider-Man here is to be a good guy, and And Captain Stacy here is just thinking, it's like, well, what do you think we do all day? Just kind of eat donuts and sit around with our thumbs up our butts? And like, butts? Oh? So, so eventually between this argument, we go on and have eventually some more mumbling going on between Stacy and Peter, where Peter is to tell Stacy that he had gotten bitten. And Gwen is like, I've been bitten too. By you. So we go on and we just have it to where all of a sudden, like, they're just continuing to just mumble on. Nothing is really makes sense here. And so Peter is to use his spider webs wastefully here. Like, those things run out to go on and spin around Stacy to then have her kiss him. I guess she doesn't realize there was a spider web coming out of him, and so she just goes with it. And so all of a sudden we have Stacy's mother, who's like, spider web? No. She goes on is like, oh, like, I guess this is working well. This is to be a relationship. So now, of course, we end up having it where Peter is to go off because he has to do Spider-Man-like things, because he's sensing something in the air, that a lizard is to be on the loose. Because we end up having Dr. Connors, who is to inject himself with of course, the serum to make him, of course, become a lizard. And the first immediate thing that he goes after is, of course, Rotha, because no one says no to him. Or in this case, we have Doc Connors, who's to say no to putting this experiment into human trials, and Rotha is trying to fast track this because they want human trials to be put together with this thing, so that way Norman Osborn could be cured and could be, of course, be able to live, because he's dying soon. Again, for the second time, we have to reiterate that. So we go on and we have Rotha, who is kind of just being driven by the guy from the other Tobey Maguire films, who doesn't die in this movie. So we go on and we have, of course, the lizard going and chasing after Rotha. And so Spider-Man is going after him. And so coincidentally, we have the lizard who goes on and is to take out a number of cars for Peter to web up. All of a sudden, we have Peter, who goes out of his way, instead of chasing after the lizard, to chase after rescuing a kid, which this kind of scene feels very familiar to the Fantastic Four bridge scene, but it is what it is here. So we have a kid named Jack who's in this car who needs to be rescued, and so Spider-Man goes on here and is to give this kid his mask, and so Peter goes on to get him out of this seat that he probably could have gotten himself out of himself, but it's whatever. So now this car is really starting on fire, and so now Peter is just holding onto this car, desperately telling this kid to climb to get to Peter. So, and we of course have Peter telling this kid to hurry up. Like, this is just the Mary Jane, like, climbing down scene. Again. Good God, there's so much recycled here. So, we go on and we have this kid who, of course, is to be at the end of this car. And Peter drops the car, webs the kid, rescues him, gives it back to his dad, and now, of course, this dad owes Spider-Man one, as he's asking, like, who are you? And he's like, I'm Batman. Oh, wait, that's the wrong franchise. I'm your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. No, he doesn't say that either. He says, I'm Spider-Man. Not your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? I'm Spider-Man. Really? You couldn't have said, I'm the amazing Spider-Man. No, like, you're not even going on brand here. it all. We even have Dr. Connors at one point laying out the word spectacular because I guess it's a nod to Spectacular Spider-Man, a animated series that it seems that everybody loves for whatever reason, and I'm okay with that because maybe it's something that I don't like, but to each their own. So, really, I don't even know what actually happens to Rotha in this movie, because I guess it doesn't really matter here. So, speaking of which, so we go on and we have, of course, Peter, who is to uh, go and talk to Connors the very next day. And Peter is mentioning about a cold-blooded animal, and it seems that Connors is the only one to be an expert on reptiles. So he's like, hey, how can I just take down a reptile? And we, of course, have Connors, who's trying to be the villain here and say, like, oh, well, like, I don't know if you can take this thing down. It might be dangerous or unpredictable. Because I'm the guy, I'm the lizard guy. I just won't tell you that, but you can tell by the side of my neck that I am the lizard guy. So, Peter sensing that Connors is a lizard guy, we have, of course, Peter Parker going to Captain Stacy here and saying it's like, well, hey, like the lizard guy that you guys are looking into, that's the guy. And I'm like going to the Last Action Hero like kind of moment. Ronald is like, that's the guy. All I needed to do was point to this one building and say that was the guy. Man, all of this police work and all I had to do was point at the building and that was the guy. Whatever. So we of course have Captain Stacy here who's saying like, I don't think that Kirk Connors is this lizard guy that you're saying because this guy had gone on to write a recommendation for my daughter that made me cry. And Peter is like, well, that's all good and well and all, but he's still the villain. And so we have, of course, Captain Stacy going through one of his associates and saying, like, you know what? Let's dig up everything that we can on Kirk Connors, but there's something fishy about this guy. And I think what Peter is saying here does make some technical sense. So, because maybe he's Spooder Man. So, speaking of Sewer Man, we have Peter Parker who goes on and is to place his camera in some part of the sewer for eventually the lizard to find out later, like, oh, property of Peter Parker? This must mean Peter Parker, Spider-Man. And what the heck is Peter Parker even doing with these photos in this world? Because that never comes up. Really, it just never does. So, in this film, so to speak. So, we have Peter doing his webbing thing in the sewer to all of a sudden wait for some kind of vibrations to tell him that the lizard is near. So instead, we end up finding out that there's a bunch of lizards all going into one fell swoop of a thing to go to one spot where the supposed lizard is. Which I'm like, shouldn't all these lizards just attach to this webbing? What is up with this webbing in this world? We have some stuff that sticks to this webbing, some stuff that doesn't. What's going on with that? I'm baffled and confused at some points. So, but it's a movie. Let's just kind of suspend disbelief for a second here for whatever gosh darn reason. So, Peter goes and follows these lizards to eventually find the bigger lizard. And so that forces us to have, of course, the lizard go and scrape and claw up Peter's chest here, which we eventually have him have the same suit for the rest of the film, because we just have Peter who I guess just re-sews that part up later, but you can still see the scrapes of the claws. Because heaven forbid you get a brand new suit, Peter, because you're a cheapskate. But you can sure as heck just have a printer press thing to just kind of put that S somewhere, you know what I'm saying? Or S? Spider. S for spider. Yeah. Whatever. The spider. That's what I meant. So, I was thinking Superman, bizarrely, for some odd reason. So, this leads us into a battle where Peter is, well, not really a battle, a chase scene where all of a sudden Peter and the lizard are swimming in these waters to eventually have Peter make it out of this thing. And you're like, man, that sucked. To where he goes on and is to make it to Gwen Stacy's place, where she is to, of course, heal his wounds. So if the secret isn't already out, it's definitely out, because we also had that moment where Peter is to be with Stacy and just quickly revealing his secret to her. And we have it, of course, where like Stacy is mentioning about all the stuff that Peter can do and that he should have to go after this lizard because it's the right thing to do, and so on and so forth. So then instead of him like taking some time away from this lizard, he's like, no, like I want to go and continue to save people because it's the right thing to do, because Ben would have wanted it, because with responsibilities and only responsibilities. So we go on and we have Stacy, who is to go and have this father that is to just continue to want to go into Stacy's room. Where this time around we have, of course, Stacy, who's mentioning about cramping and female issues, let's just say. So Stacy is just like, I know. I was going to mention about some hot cocoa, but it seems like that's a no-go because you just hate chocolate at this 1 second. So we go on here and we of course have the lizard who figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man because camera. And so now we have the lizard wanting to go through and break a toilet or two so that way he can get into Peter Parker's school, where he's just going to go through the science lab and concoct all these kinds of things to force Peter to battle him out here. And so all of a sudden Peter is in the hallway, and all of a sudden this lizard is to appear, so Peter is to fight him without his spider suit like on here, but he luckily just has his web shooters on him at all times. You would think that that would just accidentally just fire off, and then he would be like, oh, secret revealed. I guess not in this film. So we now go on and have Peter Parker without the suit on fighting the lizard here, and because we don't have that that whole like locker thing that that Peter is to like raise up, and that has his costume at his school. That doesn't work that way. So we go on and we have Peter fighting the lizard to the point of us having this Stan Lee cameo where he's fighting in this library, which is actually a really fun scene. I like that. And of course, we just have Stan Lee just listen to this music, yeah, as they're fighting it out. So we, of course, go on here and eventually have Gwen getting this trophy where she goes and wants to get a good bat at the lizard, so that way Gwen has something to do here, which is kind of nice because we really don't have Mary Jane pitching all that well until possibly the second film, to where she wants to just grab logs and stuff like that and hit Doc Ock with them. Yeah, for the most point. So we go on here and we now have it where, of course, Peter is to go and web Stacy so that way she can conveniently not break her spine, safely just swinging around on this webbing for her to just be out of this equation, so Peter can fight Lizard and web him up a ton for him to just get out of this webbing. Man, you would think that Peter would just get stronger webbing for these villains at some point in time and whatever, but no, he just never does. So we eventually have it that really, like, nobody's going to win here. Like, we're just going to have another fight towards the end of this film. So this is just kind of wasting or biding time really here. So we also have a moment here where Connors is to weirdly now have a lab that's in the sewer, and eventually Peter is to go on and find that underground lab sewer thing conveniently to go and help us have Peter figure out what Connor's master plan is. And so what that real master plan is just have everybody just turn into lizards, because that's always the lizard's plan for every single iteration of this character. It's not like all of a sudden he's going to have everybody just turn into Craven the Hunters at any point in time, because that would just benefit a bunch of people. So all of a sudden the police are going after the lizard conveniently for them to just turn into a bunch of other lizards that are like heavily going through a transformation here, to where the lizard doesn't have any extra minion lizards at any point in this film. Really, they just go towards the end of this film to turning back to normal people, cause story. So we, after that whole battle between the battle between the lizard and the Peter at the school is to be over with, we have now Peter going to Gwen and desperately telling her to concoct the antidote for what's going on with Connors. And so she goes to scramble to Oscorp to come up with the antidote, and she's waiting seemingly several minutes, which is to be a whole 8. And Peter is calling her to get out of that building because the lizard is coming to use that machine that, of course, Gwen is using right now. So Gwen is waiting it out and, of course, trying to evacuate this building by setting out a fire alarm to eventually have this room being sealed off, which does nothing for the lizard because he rips right through it. So we go on and eventually have Gwen, who's kind of waiting it out, to have this lizard kind of go into the place where Gwen is. She uses this kind of flame weapon against Lizard, but that does nothing, and he grabs something away from her anyways and just walks away here, to where Gwen is just kind of looking at what the lizard is going on and doing, because there's nothing that she can do. So we eventually have it where Spider-Man is trying to make his way to, of course, a Mother Hubber frickin' point when he is going to get shot in this film. Because if the spider sense can tell you anything, at some point there's just something that Peter just can't just not have happen to him, and that, I guess, is to be shot at some point. So bullets in the leg are Peter's obvious weakness. He can't do anything. He's basically effed. Yeah, like Tobey Maguire had numerous years of back problems on his side of things, but man, like, you get shot in the leg. Did they do anything with that in other films, let's just say? Did they mention about his leg problem? I don't think they covered it. Maybe they just mentioned his back problem also. But anyways, it is what it is. So let's... Eventually we have Spider-Man kind of webbing his way eventually to have some police officers chasing after him. All of a sudden a helicopter is to blind Peter to drop him. And so he ends up getting arrested. And so, because Peter isn't now like electrically shocked to go down here because the police are kind of stepping up their weaponry. So Captain Stacy is to try to remove the mask upon Peter, and he technically does, but Captain Stacy doesn't see who it is. Peter starts beating up a bunch of these police officers because I guess spider sense goes off, that wakes him up. So all of a sudden, eventually it is revealed to Captain Stacy that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And so eventually Captain Stacy, when he meets Gwen, is to mention to Gwen, yes, I know that your boyfriend is a man of many masks. Probably only one, because how many really masks is he kind of running through this one film? Peter Parker, not the the set prop guy that probably has like 30 of them lined up. Still, whichever. Anyways, so we go on and we have Captain Stacy that is to realize that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and he's like, "Oh, well, I'm not going to arrest you now because I see the good in you." So all of a sudden, Spider-Man is to try to run off. There is to be one cop that is to get one shot off. Stacy is trying to stop them from shooting, hold their fire. Nope, Peter gets shot in the leg. So all of a sudden now we have Peter that is desperately trying to make his way to the Oscorp building, and he's going and trying to do it in the most difficult way possible by literally climbing up certain things. He's rarely using his web to get to point A to point B. Plus, it also doesn't seem like he's going on and running out of webbing at any point in time in this movie. But, so, all of a sudden we have, of course, Jack's father, who's to realize, because he's doing this construction job, luckily for this guy, to help Spider-Man out here, is to go on and notice that Spider-Man is making it to this building, and so he's like, haha, let's use all these cranes, and let's call all these guys to get Peter to start swinging through to these cranes to easily make it to Oscorp. Conveniently, at one point, one of the cranes, grabs onto Peter as he's falling. So, to make a cool, interesting sequence here. So, we have Peter swing through using these cranes, and so Peter is to make it to Oscorp. So, Gwen is to go on and give Captain Stacy this antidote, and we get the line of many masks and so on and so forth, that Stacy is to know what's going on. He knows the drill, because he was revealed who Spider-Man was. So, and he still didn't arrest him. He could have shot him, could have killed him, could have ended this whole story possibly, or everyone would have just turned out to be lizards. Some kind of big lizard. Anyways, pushing on. So, we go on and we have Stacy making it up to the building to, of course, hand off this antidote to Peter, because it couldn't have just been Gwen that was already in the building just waiting it out for Peter to make it back onto the building, because Mother Hubbard. So, I'm going to just keep saying that joke because it's ridiculous. So, Peter eventually is to web his way up this building to eventually have the lizard, who is now on the top of this building, preventing Peter from making it to the top of this building, because that's the thing to do. So, eventually Peter does make it to the top of the building, trying to fight the lizard, and we really have it to where the lizard is just consistently out, muscling Peter to the point of breaking his webbing, and so on and so forth. So, we go on and we, of course, have Captain Stacy that starts shotgunning frickin' the lizard because he grows back his limbs anyways. We had the one spot where Peter was fighting the lizard before, and Peter ripped off this lizard's tail just for it to grow back. So, we now have it where we have Stacy, who's firing at the lizard, not going for the head, just like Thor didn't do. So, but we have Connors, who's consistently going on and shooting at these limbs, forcing the lizard to go into this freezing chemical stuff, which I should actually know the name of, but it's really just a miss to me right now. So, we, of course, have Lizard, who's, consistently getting his body frozen, and we go on and having him consistently losing limbs, firing off one hand that I guess was to be his phantom limb, whatever. So, we go on and eventually have the Lizard who stabs into Stacy while Peter is going and trying to put the antidote in this weapon to be shot out for everyone to get cured, even Connors. So now we have the big massive fight between the lizard and Peter fighting to get this antidote in there. And so we have Connors who goes on and gets cured. Unless you go on and watch another movie franchise at some point, you're like, okay, when does this exactly? I remember them saying something in the other film at some point. Uh, Other film something or sequel, Amazing Spider-Man 2, right? They say what happened to Dr. Connors, right? Spoilers for anybody that's ever heard of another film. So, God, I want to be nice. I'm going to be freaking nice about certain things. You know what I mean? So, they do the whole antidote thing. It seems that Peter is to almost fall off this building at one point. Connors is to go and grab him, but all of a sudden we realize that Connors is grabbing him with the one arm that is eventually going to not be an arm anymore. So Connors is to switch and grab him with his other hand. And so Connors is strong enough to just kind of help Peter kind of get back in this building or get back onto this building because heaven forbid Peter actually has this thing called sticky hands or feet or body because spider, right? That's just me. So he could have just crawled his way back up into the building, but no, Connors has to get this redeeming thing about him that is like, yeah, I muscled you up by myself. Because maybe Peter's powers were working at that moment. Maybe he just wanted desperately this Connors redeeming thing to say, like, oh, you're the good guy now. Great. So, we have Peter going back to see Stacy, who is now to seemingly die. Before he does, he's to go on and tell him, it's like, well, hey, like, I get that you're going to be Spider-Man and you're going to have many of enemies, but I want you to have my daughter kind of left out of this. Because if you're going on and being this superhero, then maybe you shouldn't be with Stacy. And then he's like, promise me that you'll always do that, or I'm going to come at you as a freaking ghost and haunt your dreams. And Peter's like, I promise. And then Stacy dies. Blah. And so we, of course, now have Peter, who is to make his way home to Aunt May, all again beaten up. He's like, "Hey, I'm beaten up," and Aunt May is to just like hug him, and then Peter gives Aunt May the eggs, of course, that she wants, even though I don't think it's the actual eggs that she wants. It's not organic or some other weird, goofy thing, but it's eggs nonetheless. So they hug it out, and it's just like, well, F it. So now, Gwen Stacy is to go on and have her funeral for her dad, which honestly should be like a funeral of he was on duty, so they should have like a police funeral, but maybe they didn't. I don't know. I'm not aware. So we go on and have Stacy have her funeral, realizing that her technical boyfriend is not even at the funeral. And Peter is still trying to be as distant as he can to Gwen. And so Gwen goes on is to make it to Peter's place and saying like, hey, like my teachers made it to this funeral. Like all these people have made it to this funeral. And this is kind of again like the MJ sequence where MJ is like, well, hey, like my sick mother had went to my play. And, like, you can't, Peter Parker? You can't? And so we end up having it's like, well, I can only be your friend kind of funeral moment at the very end of a Spider-Man film where Gwen Stacy is to realize that her father had made Peter promise to stay away from her if he's going to be this Spider-Man person. So that has us go on to have both Gwen and Peter going to school, where of course we have this teacher called Miss Ritter, who is to have Peter come into this class tardy, and she's like, well, as long as you're still here, because you're the star character of this film, and it would be weird if you weren't, because if you were dead, man, would that suck, because we wouldn't have a franchise going on here of another movie after this. Or more. So, fa. So, we of course go on, and Peter is to like mention that he promises that he'll try to be on time at some point. And she's like, "Well, hey, like, don't promise something that you can't keep." And Peter's like, "Well, that's the best ones, promises that you can't keep." Oh, and Gwen's just like, "Oh, like there's some potential here that eventually we're gonna get back together, maybe in sequel, because they're actually a couple in real life through most of these films, anyways, right?" I don't know if they still are, but meh, it is what it is. Between Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield. I'm assuming that they're not. I'm assuming something happened between the two of them. I don't know. I don't really care. It doesn't really matter. It's a late day, and I'm going to go out of my way to finish this up now, because holy crap, almost 2 hours. Almost 2 hours for this. This movie. There's too much stuff to talk about here. Really, there is. So we go on here, and what the heck is this? I don't even know what this is. Oh, we have Peter, of course, doing the Tobey Maguire thing, where he's going through the city and webbing it up in a kind of much more cooler way of approaching things. But if you look at every end of every superhero movie, there's always this kind of flying off kind of scene here, like in Daredevil or whatever the heck. Every single one of these things, we always have this kind of, like, I would have liked for there to be some kind of American flag in the background to just be really stereotypically just like the Tobey Maguire ending scene of that film. So we go on, and we of course have Andrew, who's swinging through the CGI things of here, and so that is to supposedly end this movie, but we end up having also an end credit scene that isn't to seem to really, in my thought process, like, really feel like it's gonna go anywhere, because another movie after this and we're done. So we of course have Kirk Connors in prison, who is talking to this mysterious man that we would have to believe that it's actually the actual Peter Parker's uncle's murderer's guy who's talking to Connors here. And so, yeah, just kind of saying that Connors is to, of course, want this guy to stay away from Peter Parker. And really, that's just to be the all that wraps up between the whole bit of this. So I'm just going to go out of here and just, like, end credit scene. Who cares? It does nothing for this movie. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.